Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome back to another episode of the Free Marketeers podcast. This week we've got a very special episode. We've got a special guest, Sindile Vabaza. I'll let him introduce himself just now. Thank you all again for joining us in week 2 of lockdown South Africa. Now, hopefully, we're heading towards the 21st of April as the deadline, but let's see if that will be extended or not. We'll get into that and all sorts of other topics and discussion points as the show goes on. We're also joined by Jacques, one of our regulars this week. So the three of us will talk you through the latest updates in South Africa in the world of COVID-19. Sindile, over to you. Just give the viewers maybe some background on you and how things are going right now with you. I think you're in the Eastern Cape at the moment. How things are going in coronavirus South Africa.
Okay. I know you guys from writing for the Free Market Foundation. I also do a bit of writing for the IRR. Also a bit of an investor. I dabble quite a bit in that.
Hey, there we go.
You have to, man. You got to try. It's hard out here. We're almost hitting 20 rand to the dollar. It's tough stuff. In terms of the Eastern Cape, I'm in Mthatha, former Transkei. Lots of decay, and you're seeing kind of the effect of what happens when something like the coronavirus hits a place that's been failing quite a lot post 1994. So just a little bit of background. Like pre-1994, Mthatha was actually incredibly well run. It was the iron fist of Matanzima. So it was clean, there was no potholes, there was functioning schools. I mean, it was probably what any white person pre-1994 would go in and go, hey, that looks like where I live. There's neighborhoods with kids running around, the schools function, etc., etc., etc. I mean, I remember for myself, I went from a school in Mthatha when I was about 6, and I went to a school in Pietermaritzburg, and absolutely no adjustment, no period, no whatever. But back to like the coronavirus point, since 1994, when the ANC came into power, things have started to disintegrate. So it's one of the things when I have conversations with my mother, she complains because she's retired and she pays rates and taxes, but she gets no services.
Cool. And
so there's quite regular water like shortages and cuts, so she's had to buy like 2 5,000 liter tanks, which have helped to get through. There's quite a lot of electricity cuts as well. So there's a lot of stuff that happens because the electricity, a lot of it is handled by the municipality. So as you get here and you see all of that, you're beginning to see the problems with coronavirus. So the other day I was driving to the petrol station. There were no police, there were no army, there was nothing. People were basically still walking around, people were driving. Those who were sensible still had masks, but those were more like people in cars. I think just as you can see, because I think one of the things that is not discussed around the coronavirus, because people tend to focus on townships and big cities. Sure. But one of the things I've noticed is that you look at all the municipalities on what you can call the periphery of South Africa, and all these municipalities that have broken down, and nobody seems to like be discussing how coronavirus will affect those, because when there's water cuts, will people have, access to stuff? And these are like middle class people. So that's one of the problems. This virus is showing up a lot of like the structural weaknesses around our country, which is your failed municipalities, the Department of Water and Sanitation, which has been a shambles, our just rubbish, wastewater works, everything, ESCOM. I mean, people will know about this kind of stuff.
It's funny sorry, I was going to say on the water and the energy issues, it's funny that now in the last week or so, especially on water, we've heard the department come out and say they'll provide water to informal settlements, that sort of thing. And ESCOM, now they can do maintenance. All it's taken is a global pandemic for the South African government to actually talk about providing services that people have paid for decades and decades now. Post 94, we think it's still relatively close to us, but it's been, you know, a couple of decades now. So I think you're very right to highlight how the virus and the pandemic has highlighted a lot of cracks in South Africa that maybe some of us were aware of, but now it's really, you know, it's exposing a lot of the issues that are there.
Yes. I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, just to add on to your point, I think the virus is pushing those issues to the center, because usually in our country, you get all of this made up stuff about, you know, these PR things with white monopoly capital, and you know, people will make stuff up, or we need to take land from farmers, you know, like depressing stuff like that. And now, because of the virus, you can't be going on about stuff about white monopoly capital when people can't wash their bloody hands and stuff. Like it's really chipping away at all the garbage that's kind of in the mainstream conversations.
Yeah, it might be good in that respect. I hope we can learn at least some lessons from it. I guess time will tell. Jacques, I'll throw to you. How are things going your side? Have you got a lot of cabin fever yet, or are you managing to survive? I think, you know, sorry, before I go to you, I was just going to say, for a lot of us, I think we would consider middle class, we could still be all right. You know, we've got our internet and we can stock food quite well. But obviously for poorer South Africans, as with anything, when stuff like this happens, it's going to affect them a lot more. So I think it's important just to think about them sometimes. But anyway, sorry, don't let me go on too much. Jacques, I'll go to you.
No, it's going well this side. Our local spa now has a sort of a drive-through WhatsApp service. So they are
the market provides.
The market provides. They're improvising. So yeah, life's going on sort of this side. But yeah, I've now heard that they spoke on RSG. Apparently, don't quote me on this, but apparently 2 doctors who tested positive in Limpopo were apparently self-isolating in their home, and then allegedly they were taken out by police. When the police pitched up at their house, they found their lawyer, told them to film everything, and the police basically forced them out of their home and into a hospital or government facility, basically a government quarantine facility, when they were already in their home self-isolating. So yeah, there's just another form law enforcement taking place in South Africa. Stories doing the rounds of basically these black markets and cigarettes now. I mean, we all know black markets go hand in hand with violence, with alcohol. It's the same thing. So, and I think when you've got basically a commissar like Becky Selle in charge of the whole situation, just exacerbates the whole situation. A couple of other issues, they've now apparently allowed street vendors who sell food to continue operating. But then again, that's very good. I agree with that. I fully support that. I mean, those people will literally die if they have to go 3 weeks without any income. They will literally die. But now they're still not allowing. They're still not allowing restaurants to operate. I think Sindile made this point. There's still not restaurants to operate who have got better hygiene practices, etc., etc. So yeah, the regulations are extremely arbitrary. And what they want you to sell, what they don't want you to sell. I mean, people, for instance, go to a grocery store, you get your everything, and you just want to include a magazine. They're not allowed to sell you the magazine. It's very, very retarded. Yeah, and I think the situation will worsen. I mean, now we've got John Steenhuisen from the DA saying government should prep for an extended lockdown. And I know can't figure out if he's saying there should be an extended lockdown or just he suspects there might be and government should start prepping for it.
Right.
And I don't think anyone should argue for an extended lockdown, because at the end of the day, an economic collapse will merely exacerbate the effects of coronavirus. It will cause more unnecessary death and destruction. And that's the thing that people don't get, is we are not a wealthy country. Majority of our people live below the poverty line. They cannot afford to go more than 3 weeks without income. You simply cannot argue that by implementing these measures to save lives when you will literally lead to innocent people starving to death because they don't have any food, but afford any food. I mean, it's a difficult situation. I'm not saying Cyril I'm not saying Cyril had an easy choice to make.
No, of course.
But I think the government has thought this through completely. Now luckily they are starting to create exceptions, but I think they still have a long way to go.
That's usually the case, right? With any sort of regulations and restrictions, if they're applied countrywide, whether it's South Africa or any country, the problem is it's applied to all sectors of society. So from poor to middle income to upper class to, well, you can argue the politicians usually don't have to worry about the regulations. They can go along their merry way. Sindile, I'll go to you there on what Jacques highlighted about the sort of arbitrariness of some of the regulations and what you've mentioned on social media. Surely this makes it even more difficult for people to just try and have some semblance of everyday life if you don't know what exactly you can and you can't buy, and it's all very arbitrary. What do you think of that?
Just to build on the point of arbitrariness, just from where I am here in Mthatha, I've been seeing when people want to do something, they simply do it.
Sure.
I think the resources to enforce this lockdown are far too thin in the first place. Like, because there's so much breakdown in our country, structural breakdown, our hopes of enforcing this lockdown nationwide, I feel, wasn't really that possible. I mean, you could enforce it in your big cities, your Joburg, your Pretoria, your Cape Town, your Durban, PE, etc. But once you start getting outside of those central areas where a lot of policy and opinion makers live, I think it would be very, very difficult. I remember when I was at the petrol station the other day, there was kids walking around hugging each other with impunity. You know, I'm 2000s, they're all walking around, they're hugging, they're kissing each other, and you're sitting there and you're like, so I think from that point, there was always going to be a concession from my viewpoint when people got tired, as you saw with the concessions to taxi drivers, and as you saw with informal street traders, because the government knows that there would be violence. But because of that, it's shown up the fundamental arbitrariness, if you will, of the whole situation. And as Jacques mentioned, if you're going to let street traders trade, why not restaurants who have better hygiene practices, who can probably better enforce social distancing and have better equipment to protect their staff? Like, because where informal traders trade, it's often very packed. People are sardined in together. So it becomes a bit farcical from my viewpoint. So for me, I think the government needs to sort of change tack, because I think the strategy should have always been, we need to scale up testing. And then if people, either you have people socially distance, or if you have people in townships, and unfortunately this might sound terrible, but people in townships are sardined together, you might have to quarantine them, like at a facility, because if you live in a more upper class neighborhood, you've got space to self-isolate at home.
No, of course,
So
being self-isolated in a house with a widescreen TV and Wi-Fi and a cappuccino machine and whatever. Some people see this as a 3-week holiday.
Yeah, so I think the government should have, probably be focused on large-scale testing and then isolating the people who show symptoms and who are at risk. And the experts can decide that and have a proper framework for that, and then allow the economy to keep going. Because right now, as Jacques pointed out, again, to build on his point, this is going to have far more devastating effects in the long term in terms of coronavirus. Because if another bout comes back, I mean, we can't lock down forever. We're not a wealthy economy. We can't afford to be in lockdown forever. We can't have this drag on for months on end, because as Jacques pointed out, people will starve. And I mean, we literally cannot do what America does, which is just do the whole thing of cash transfers, because as I pointed out another post on social media, we already do cash transfers for people as it is via social grants. And those are incredibly expensive as it is. If more people drop down, we simply can't afford it, considering all of the stuff on the horizon, your NHI, your EWC, and there's people clamoring for free education for students in university. You know, we've just, the government is just biting off way more than it can chew. And ultimately, we have to make some tough choices. And we have to do some tough things that might offend people's sensibilities. Because right now, as much as I saw an article, the BBC praising Cyril.
I saw that.
As much as you can implement, and you can say you're implementing a lockdown, it's not happening.
Yes.
You go to these areas in the periphery, you go to townships, you go anywhere, people just aren't necessarily following the rules of this lockdown. And I think some of it is a class-based issue. And I think this got pointed out to me here in Mthatha when, again, I was at the petrol station and all of the people in cars had masks. That was the one thing. People with cars had masks. People who were walking or taking taxis did not. I noted the behavior. People who were in cars made sure to distance themselves socially from people. So people would like take 2 steps back from someone else when they were waiting in the line for an ATM. If you saw some of the scenes, you saw some of the pictures in the video. If you go where a lot of people who aren't middle or upper class were, none of that was happening. And I think some of this has quite a bit of a class nature to it. And so people can't just simply put it racially, because Mthatha is a city full of black people. So you can't really say it's a racial thing. It's more, it has that class nature to it.
Oh, I think you highlight some very important points. It's easy for us to think in terms of just race because, of course, we like things being binary. So we think, okay, white people in the suburbs, they all stick to self-quarantine, but black people, they're ungovernable in the townships. They just want to do whatever they want and all this sort of thing. So it is, in a way, maybe it's good because it exposes some people's thinking. And, if those people are really honest with themselves and their own thinking, maybe they'll reassess some of their preconceived notions. Jacques, I'll change tack slightly here, and I wanted to ask you about the new privacy regulations, the effect on privacy that these regulations might have. I think they were mentioned yesterday. I know our colleague Martin van Staden wrote an article on this. It is on Business Day for anyone who wants to read that article. But this is another effect of the epidemic, and of government wanting to, maybe well-intentioned, trying to do the right thing and trying to track people who have been in contact with others if they're positive for COVID-19. But of course, we always talk about government action and unintended consequences. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, yes. I think the Protection of Privacy Act, or Protection of Information Act, sorry, it lays out requirements for gathering data on people. And one of the main thing is, when government wants to gather personal data on people, it must be for a very specific reason. And government must outline this reason. Want to gather the data for, which they haven't done. They just said for government's function relating to COVID-19. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's a very broad thing, which is problematic from a rule of law perspective. The other problem is some of the other requirements, and there are exceptions to these, but they are very strict, is that it must be consensual. The person must know that it's being taken, and they must know what it's used for. There are exceptions to this, but for instance, national security concerns. But this situation, in my opinion, does not justify government, for instance, just taking everybody from Vodacom, for instance, taking their Google location data, for instance. I just don't think the situation warrants it at that point, at this point in time, in both the Constitution and the Act itself, because government is not abiding by the law in terms of the requirements placed on them that they should adhere to. So if they can prove that there's a case for that, and they can take it to court and they can prove it, then we can discuss that. That's a totally different story. But what they're at the moment doing is basically just trying to circumvent laws through arbitrary diktat. And I think that's completely insane at the moment. I mean, your location data, people can argue, yeah, well, why do you care? Here's the thing. It's actually in your personal realm, your location data, because it can show who you interact with, it can show where you were, it can show, for instance, personal information such as the therapist you visit, it can show personal information as when you went to the doctor, I think some people might be bothered by the fact that it can show that they are having affairs. All these sorts of things can come out in the open. But at the end of the day, it's in your personal realm. It's very personal information. And how the Constitutional Court has developed the right to privacy is basically their whole framework or paradigm is privacy is extremely important in your personal realm. But as you move away from it, it gets less important because then there are other considerations. But this, for me, government is still not abiding by the law in terms of them having to prove that it is required to do it in the way they want to do it now. And I don't even think they'll be able to prove it because, again, it's such a broad regulation. They don't even say how they're going to use it, specifically what they're going to use it for. They don't say how the information will be protected. Will it be anonymized? Who will have access to this data, etc. It's just done. It's such a vague and broad regulatory provision that I think it's blatantly unconstitutional at this point.
Sindile, any thoughts on that one? I mean, I think it sounds like quite an open and shut case from our sort of liberal point of view, but anything you'd like to add there?
I find that concerning because I think it's a bit like in the case of 9/11. Once you start rolling out those sort of laws where you infringe upon people's rights to privacy, it's very, very difficult to roll them back.
Exactly. And
that's the concern. And it worries you because more so because of what the government can do with that. I think the government has shown themselves to be quite untrustworthy and willing to do things that are quite below the belt, for lack of a better term. So for me, that really concerns me when Jacques says that.
Yeah, it's another thing that I think, that's part of why we do these shows and why we do the work we do, is to try and inform people of the implications of some of these things, because a lot of people might not even know. So this is also what we mentioned last week on the episode, on last week's version of the Free Marketeers, where we talked about active citizenry, and we need to keep government accountable at all times, but especially during crises. Any crisis of any sort of nature, whether it's a hurricane or a pandemic or a war, anything like that, governments like to use them to expand their own powers. And then at the end of the day, after everything has sort of calmed down, they're very, very reluctant to relinquish those powers. So viewers, just another one for all of you and all of us to keep an eye on. Sindile, I'll go straight back to you then. You wrote an article for us. It was published today on City Press. Viewers, it will be uploaded to our website next week, so you can read it there. You can also find it, of course, on the City Press websites and also on our Facebook page. We've shared it there. But Sindile, there you make a few recommendations of what you think the government can do post COVID-19 to sort of help kickstart and push the economy forward again. We always, the big buzzword going around nowadays is structural reform, and we need to focus on these things. But we're never told what structural reform, and when we are told, it's usually in the direction of bigger government, more government control. What's anything in your article that you maybe want to highlight and your thoughts around that?
I'll highlight a couple of things. I was just thinking, because I was watching, one of the things that inspired me in that article, I was watching a YouTube video about sellers on Amazon in America struggling to get stock from China. And one of the things I kind of noticed as I was reading more was that global companies are probably going to want to diversify their supply chains in the wake of this, so they're not stuck. And I think for me, when I saw that, I saw an opportunity for South Africa, because here in South Africa, we have a lot of young people, a lot of unskilled labor, that need labor-intensive industries to come this side. But the problem is that our labor laws are so onerous on companies. And so one of the things I do suggest in the article is that we have to go for a deregulation of our labor laws. And I think one of the things I did do was anticipate that there'd be concerns about low wages. And so my argument takes on two forms. One of it is that, yes, initially wages would be lower, but they would rise in time as there was more absorption of the labor market. It became more competitive and it tightened. And as people got on-job training, that would help kind of raise wages. It's happened in New Zealand, it happened in Taiwan, and the second one is probably that it's an obvious one. It's just simply a case of basic math. If we don't do this, there will be more and more people who will require social grants. It's kind of a negative reinforcing cycle. There will be more people who require government money, but in fact, it's not that much. So for the people who will say, no, it's exploitative, my argument is, even if those people drop out and they need government assistance will still probably be less than, quote unquote, the so-called exploitative wages people are worried about.
Right.
So my argument is, when you're at the bottom end of the wage scale in society, every single rand counts. And so we have to be able to make that argument to people who will tell us, no, you guys want to exploit the poor. Our argument needs to state strongly that, listen, we do care, but we are not trying to subvert reality. The fact is, if we don't let these companies come and employ our young people, give them a path towards a better life in which they can get on-job training. Because one of the things I highlight is that could open up potential for more businesses to open up in the townships as people get on-job training. Because I think one of the things I think one of your colleagues in Biake always highlights to me is that people in the townships hustle a lot. If you add that dimension of on-job training and skill training, that will be very good in terms of opening up what can happen with the township economy. I think the other one was, I believe we need to cut income taxes and value-added taxes. Because
you'll get a lot of support there.
It's a tough one, but I think people need to be able to spend in the real economy. We need to have demand. Demand is a big thing now because it's going to drop because of this virus. We need to spur demand in the economy. And we need people to save as well. I mean, depending on what choices people make, we need people to save, but we also need people to spend in that real economy to sort of spur demand. So I think that is important, because as it is right now, people are already struggling. Like, even before the virus, we were overtaxing South Africa's middle class way too much. People were struggling. There was article after article about people having to go deep into debt just to survive. They're very, very vulnerable. And I think we need to take the boot off the throats of South Africa's middle class. And I think this virus will give us the right opportunity. And that needs to come with, I believe, corollary cuts, both in the size of government, something we should have been doing anyway, and cuts to government salaries. I think the exception you can make, because it will be extremely difficult, is health workers and teachers.
Sure.
You can make that exception, because that will be a tough sell, I think. Just talking to the people in both those, it's very, very difficult. But the other stuff, I think you can get across the board, across the line. Because there's a lot of non-essential government departments that kind of double up. Like, South Africa's got a lot of just this inefficient thing going around where people just sit around and do nothing because it's overly bloated unnecessarily. Even as a starting point, just trim all of that away as a starting point. And I think that is quite an essential thing to do. I'm hoping that, and I mean, this is hope. I'm not going to sit here and say I expect it. It's hope that with the goodwill Cyril has gotten because of the response to the virus, I'm hoping he will have the moral and political courage to start making some of these reforms. Because it's clear we can't spend our way out of this. We've got, the government has just got too many obligations. It's got to bail SOEs out. We can't spend our way out of this. We can't do cash transfers like America. I mean, that's problematic in and of itself, but we can't do that. because we're just not rich enough.
I
So,
think
yeah.
I'm definitely going to pick up on that one word and that concept that you mentioned, courage. If the president and the high ups in the political in the corridors of power can have the courage to do the actual reforms needed, then I think South Africa could come out post coronavirus as one of the sort of leading growing economies in the world. And I don't want to underplay that. I mean, the rest of the world is the whole world is getting hit very hard by this. If South Africa can signal to the rest of the world, we're going to do the right things now. We want all of you to come invest here. We want to give our own people the freedom to try and build their own businesses. Please come and invest. Let's build capital here. And then later on, after 10 years, 20 years, then government can have probably more in tax collection and revenue than they ever thought possible, because that is simply dwindling at this point in time. If they do the right things now, more people will probably pay their taxes in the long run. Jacques, I'll throw to you. Anything that you would like to maybe highlight, maybe in again the hopeful sense? Obviously realize that you're a man of reason and stats and hard cold data, so maybe asking you for a hopeful view of what the government can do. I'm putting you in an uncomfortable position, but what do you think in terms of policies and that kind of thing that the government could theoretically do to give South Africa a sort of boost post coronavirus? I think you're on mute there.
My bad.
There we go.
Coronavirus, definitely some tax cuts. I mean, VAT, income tax, especially for the lower income classes. We should definitely look at attracting foreign investment, cuts in corporate income taxes. Corporate income is quite a difficult tax to collect. So yeah, I just think we need to ease the burden on consumers and on investors, because what the government doesn't realize is you cannot tax people into oblivion. You cannot tax your way into prosperity. But at the end of the day, the prerequisite for tax is wealth. Where does that wealth come from? It comes from voluntary interactions between individuals in society, trading goods, services, generating more wealth, becoming more productive. And then I also think they need to start diverting funds from silly departments such as arts and culture, etc., to the healthcare sector, and a lot of to the healthcare sector, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, especially. I think those, the Department of Education, Department of Health, they need to redivert those funds allocated to other departments, and especially the funds allocated to SAE. So they need to liquidate SAA Express quickly. They must try to sell off the now. Government must try to ease its burden, because at the moment they are going to see a huge slump in tax revenue, and with Moody's downgrade, they're not going to get a lot. Their interest payments on bonds are going to skyrocket because the demand for bonds it's just going to slump. So it's going to get very, very difficult for government to keep on spending the way it's currently spending, especially after all this is over. They just won't be able to. They'll have to go into extreme levels of debt, where extreme interest rates are charged on that debt. And one thing I want to mention is on this whole quantitative easing package that is being implemented around the world. Quantitative easing is very highly correlated with inequality. The money supply being artificially boosted, because what happens is they usually use these to boost asset markets. And then when the money is first pumped in, remember inflation hasn't taken a hold yet, but when that money reaches the lower income classes, eventually the money has basically lost a lot of its purchasing power because of inflation. And I mean, how do you control inflation? You need to take money out of the system again. What does our government try to do then? They just try to tax people to take money out of the system again. It's sort of like modern monetary theory is getting a hold here, and I think it will be getting a huge boost in the world. So I think we need to take charge and take control of the narrative now, the economic narrative, that government is not the answer after all of this. The answer lies in the individual and people cooperating to get themselves out of the situation.
Thanks, Jacques. I think we'll sort of wrap up on that. I think we've had a pretty good discussion. Just the last one, I'll throw to either of you. Any parting shots, any parting thoughts that you'd like to give the viewers?
Do you want to start, Jacques?
Oh no, you can start.
I don't know. I would probably say I hope, again, I get there, because I don't know what else I could possibly say in this time. I hope the government would reconsider this lockdown, and hopefully think about the economic ramifications of shutting down the economy for so long, and even John Steenhuisen saying we should prepare. I'm not saying he's saying we should have a lockdown, but saying government should prepare for an extended lockdown. I hope they reconsider and they think of a different strategy, one that specifically emphasizes testing, the one that emphasizes the proper and efficient use of our medical resources, because we don't have a lot of them, and making sure that people who are very sick are either isolated, self-isolated, or quarantined, depending on the situation. Because I think that's important, because we can't just go on and on like this. Just from the point of view of our economy is already being sluggish, we can't. Hopefully they'll reconsider. That's pretty much my last thought.
Hope is a powerful thing, and I think you're right to point it out. We need hope in South Africa, and hopefully that's something we're going to see implemented in policies going forward. Jacques, and then for you. Unmute again.
Yeah.
I promise I didn't mute him, so I mean.
No, that's my mistake. A vaccine being tested that apparently generates quite a lot of antibodies. So I really hope those trials are successful. I really hope we do get a vaccine, but not just shut down an economy. Because when we speak of economy, we're not just referring to money, we're speaking of people. When you shut down an economy, you are shutting down people and preventing them from earning a livelihood. You are literally, when you shut down an economy, you are preventing people from living, from on living. You are literally throwing people to the wolves and telling them, well, listen, yeah, people are going to die from this virus. So now we're going to shut down the economy and just make it even worse. You simply cannot do that. This is not about money. The economy is about people's lives. So I really hope government reconsiders its plans, and I really don't hope they implement an extended lockdown.
I think that's a very vital point on which to highlight and on which to end. This isn't just abstract theory that we talk about on these shows, and when we write about things, economics is about people's lives. So the less government can impact on that, I think the better for everyone concerned. Okay, guys, thanks very much for joining me this week. Sindile, thank you very much. We must have you on again very soon. Jacques, thank you as always a pleasure. Viewers, to you, thanks once again for joining us. Please ensure that you follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, Free Market Foundation South Africa. Please like this video. Please share it all over your various social media platforms. Please talk to your friends about our ideas, the things we discuss, the policy proposals we make. Let's get the word out. Let's get some momentum going for a free and prosperous post-COVID-19 South Africa. We'll talk to you guys again next week. And for now, goodbye.